Blade of the Immortal, the 2019 version, I watched because, of course, the 2008 version was on Anime Dartboard, and I sort of wanted to compare and contrast the differences. Now, of course, because the 2008 version appeared on Anime Dartboard, I don't need to do a plot synopsis for this, because, of course, everyone already watched the 2008 version, right? Well, it's the same plot. To start off with the differences, the only major ones other than like directorial style and animation and age that are different between this version and the original, I would say, is it seems like this version has changed the order that events happen in. If I had to guess, I'm actually willing to bet that this version is probably more manga accurate, just because this tells the complete story and doesn't cut off halfway like the original. So I'm willing to bet they probably followed the source material. But in that regard, I would have to say that I actually prefer the original anime in that case, because it seems like the events were changed in that one to make it seem like the main character, Rin, had more of a character arc and was starting to learn to stand a bit more on her own. They sort of like rearranged things so that that would happen. Whereas in this, I imagine, was probably the original set of events, but you don't get as clear of an arc, so she seems a little wishy-washy at the beginning, where she's like, oh, I'm gonna stand on my own 2 feet, and then she regresses, and then she's like, I'm gonna do it this time, and then she regresses again, instead of just one clean arc where you slowly see her progress as a character. As for the directorial style, I don't know who directed the original 2008 one, but the 2019 version, this one, is directed by the director of Steins Gate. And I can see the resemblance that he still uses a lot of the same visual tricks, but he sort of climbs up his own asshole at the beginning of this. And normally when I say that, it's when a show just goes on a monologue with like dollar store philosophy that everyone's heard a million times before. But this is actually a special case where it's not caused by the writing, it's caused by the direction itself. The writing of the show is mostly unchanged from the original, which is there's these like shots where you have these kids and like a grainy film grain textures singing, and there's sort of like these unnecessary establishment shots and this sort of like avant-garde, abstract shots and frames taken, and when intense action happens, there's just like flashes of red and splashes of blood. It's hard to get into details without specifically showing it on screen. You'll just have to take my word for it that the like process of good direction is that it helps tell the story. But this does the opposite. It distracts from the story by calling too much attention to itself. Now, I will say that almost wonder if he got told to knock it the fuck off by the production team, because the first 3, 4, 5 episodes are heavily like that, and then it just turns into a normal show for a while, with only a few moments here and there across multiple episodes that are just so blatantly in your face. One of which I don't hate, because it was designed to show that a character was going fucking crazy. And I think it really aided it in that way, but other times it's sort of weirdly intrusive. And speaking of directorial style, I don't know if the ending got rushed on this, because it kind of feels like it, because the final episode just doesn't seem to have any dialogue. Like, to the point where I was like, am I just watching this wrong? And I like tried to swap to different languages and stuff, and like, no, it just doesn't have dialogue for like a good chunk of the middle part of the final episode. And like, you see the characters' lip flaps, and I guess it's just not dubbed in any language. It's kind of weird. It was weird. It was like, why the fuck isn't this dubbed? I don't understand. Anyway, let's get on to what I liked about the show and what I didn't like. We're going to actually start with what I didn't like about the show. Obviously, this continues on past the point of the original show. In fact, I think the original show is like episode 5 of this one, something like that, 5 or 6 or something. They get through it really quickly. They introduce another main villain after Rin gets with the head of the Ito Ryu, and it's like, oh, he might not be so bad. Maybe he is so bad. Who knows? And it is Kagimura, who is attempting to discover the secret of Manji's immortality. And honestly, there's like 5 episodes dedicated to them just cutting up Manji, and I think it is designed to also sort of lead into the fact that Manji's limbs can be grafted onto other people, and it also brings back that one psycho guy. But honestly, after the psycho guy died, I thought that was a satisfying enough story. I don't think anything was aided by bringing him back other than bringing back Rinzo, I think the story could have done without him and that whole plot line. Kagemura is an interesting one because he sort of supplements the main characters as a bit of a protagonist as we get to learn about him and see him develop against the Ito Ryu guys, who almost sort of become the heroes towards the end. And a big bulk of the story is actually Kagemura, who's working for the government, fighting off against the Ito Ryu guys, to the point where there were entire points of the story where I'm like, honestly, it seems like our main characters, like Manji and Rin, are sort of not plot relevant anymore. I will say, to the show's credit, it does pull it around back at the end, and I was gonna be fucking livid. Because, like, you get to this issue where it's like, if the Ito Ryu guys and the government guys just kill each other, there's no point for our main cast. And if Manji ends up, like, taking out the Ito Ryu guys, or the government does, or anything like that, then Rin becomes an unnecessary character. So we have the beginning part of the show showing that Rin is trying to learn to become stronger, and she does, but not as strong as you would want. Like, you never see her 1v1 the Ito Ryu leader, which I actually would have appreciated, especially because the show's not afraid to have strong female characters, which we'll talk about in a second with Maki. But I will say that the fact that she did end up being the one to kill him, one, saves her point in the plot, and I think it is a nice tie back that it's like, this starts off with her being like, I'm gonna kill this guy, and then at the end she kills this guy. And frankly, I was very satisfied with this. I think it wrapped everything up in a bow that it needed to, and honestly, it had a pretty good happy ending that I did enjoy. Every character that survived, that you would have expected to survive, ended up going to a place that you probably would have appreciated. Like, anyone that you've come to like that didn't just straight die, honestly, probably ended up where you would have wanted. They're living a sort of happy, fulfilled life. Even some characters you probably wouldn't have lived to have a happy, fulfilled life. And of course, before we end this, we gotta talk about my girl Maki, who I just love in principle. Which, if you remember from the 2008 one that you totally watched, Maki is the sort of childhood friend of the Ito Ryu leader, and she's also just a random prostitute who just happens to be the strongest character in the entire series. And there's a bit of a debate as I was going throughout this when we introduce Kagemura, who just effortlessly bodies Manji like he's fucking nothing. Like, Kagemura is demonstrated to be this, like, unstoppable sword wizard, and it's sort of like, okay, like a question developed in my head that the show doesn't ask, but it comes to me, where I'm like, is Kagemura like Maki tier? Like, could he beat Maki? And I will have to say that I honestly wasn't expecting them to fight, and they almost do. The show teases the fight, but we can pretty conclusively say that no, he wasn't, if only because he ends up losing to the Ito Ryu leader in a fair 1v1, and we know Maki's stronger than the Ito Ryu leader. And I also appreciate that, like, when Maki shows up, this guy instantly sees her, and he has like 8 dudes with him, and he's like, okay, 7 people are about to die here. Like, I started throughout the show just starting to refer to Maki as a fucking meat grinder, because she just shreds people so effortlessly. Even her death had like a sort of impact, because she's shot with like 20 rifles, and she's like, hold on one second, I got one last thing to do before I kick the bucket. And then she runs up a fucking mountain while getting shot at by bullets, deflects bullets, and just kills everyone before she passes out dead. Maki is fucking awesome, and I sort of love that Blade of the Immortal has not one, but 2 main antagonists, and neither of those main antagonists, nor the main character, nor even the female lead of the show ends up being the strongest character. It really is, at the end of the day, just a random prostitute, basically. And I think that, first off, adds a sort of like layer of depth to the world and a sort of layer of realism, that like the main actors aren't necessarily the ones who are actually the strongest. And of course, I just love even though she is connected to the main villain, I just love, in principle, the concept that some rando is essentially just best strongest character. And I love that, like, her major conflict is like this concept between pacifism and the ideals of her loved ones versus her just straight up desire to not want to kill or fight. Anyway, Blade of the Immortal is a really good show, and it is a genuinely enjoyable experience. It's not life-changing or anything. It's far from the best action series I've ever seen, but from its characters to the character development and how it ends, Blade of the Immortal is just a genuinely good sort of, I would almost call it a popcorn show, but I will say that's almost not giving it enough credit. It's not deep enough to be a deep show, but it's still too deep to be pure popcorn. So it's sort of like this in-between blend, and it's just a genuinely good ride. Twitch and Discord in the description. I've been Sacrobolic, your envoy of hope. Bye-bye!